Hello everybody, this is Russ Bucher from ControlMyCanon, and in this video we're going to take a look at how to use the ControlMyCanon non-GPU live view mode, and that's what I have running right now. Non-GPU means it's just using the regular Windows graphics capabilities, and it is not using the video card's graphics capabilities. But we also have a GPU live view mode, which lets you offload most of the image stream processing off to your graphics card if you have a good graphics card, and which helps reduce the load on the CPU, and plus you get some new features with that. If your computer is capable, and most computers nowadays are, I would suggest using the GPU capable live view mode, and we have a separate video and knowledge base article on how to use that. Anyway, so let's take a look at this old mode here, and let's see what it can do. You know, you could still use this on older computers and it works just fine. And also, if you're running ControlMyCanon in a virtualized environment, this is probably the mode you have to run in, because a lot of virtualized environments don't properly emulate video cards. And if you were to try to run GPU mode live view in it, it would just wind up with a white screen. So you may have to come back to this if you're running in a virtualized environment. Okay, so let's see what it can do. Now, I just have a Canon 60D hooked up here. We're shooting a piece of iron pyrite in a light box, and let's take a look at the light box here. This thing's very cheap. So we have a Canon 60D with a 100mm macro lens, looking at a piece of iron pyrite in this very inexpensive light box. We have photocopier paper, some diffuse material I got out of a binder from Walmart. Probably cost $1 all said and done, and a couple lights from IKEA. Now let's take a look at some of the settings that allows us to use this mode of live view. Here currently now I just have the format set for JPEG, and we're going to save to this folder with a standard counter. I've created a profile called Iron Pyrite for this. So all these settings I make here, plus all the settings I make in the Layers tab to control how and what is being displayed, overlaid on top of the live view stream, will be saved to this profile, so you can come back to it at any time. So I'm going to go over to the Layers tab, and normally, you know, actually I'm just going to back up here and close live view here, and this is what it normally looks like when you start it up for the first time. You know, you connect to your camera, there's no other tabs, and you're just looking at the image browser here. So to turn on live view, you just click on live view. There's your live view stream, and this is streaming about 15 to 24 small JPEGs to your computer over the USB cable. And I'm going to be needing now the Layers tab. So if I go to the View menu, Live View Layers tab, this is where I control a lot of what is displayed in live view. So any changes we make here in this Layer tab don't affect the final captured image. So it just kind of overlays information that we need. And here you can see I have overlaid this red stuff here, and this is really the exposure outer layer. I'll just turn it off, and that shows us areas that are over or underexposed. And so, for example, if you look here, you see this very black area. Here, this very bright area. If I turn it on, it's saying this is potentially over or underexposed. And we'll come back to this one later. So this is very useful. And I have the focus box here. I'm just going to try focusing. You see how it changes color. Now I also have this other color here, and that is from focus peaking. It helps me to see what areas are in focus. Okay, now let's take a look at the different things that we can do with this. Well, first thing you can do is you can capture an image. So if I go up here and click on Shoot, and there's another Shoot button here, and the reason there's two of them is you can actually detach this. So if I go to Live View Detached, well, it shows the image browser in the background, but now I have this Live View window. And you could take this and put it on your main window if you have a huge monitor, or you could put it on another monitor and maybe maximize it. And you can even take the image browser off of here and detach it, put it on another monitor. So you could spread all this information out over several different monitors. But for a video today, I'm just going to leave it attached. So I'll go back to the View menu, Live View, Attached. Then you click on Live View, and you can just cycle between the Live View and the browser with these buttons, or by default, the spacebar on the keyboard. You could set a shortcut to toggle between the two here with the shortcuts. Now what I'd like to do here is, when I capture an image in Live View, I don't want to necessarily have to toggle back and forth. I'd like to at least be able to see it briefly. So what we can do here is, well, first I'll just show you capturing an image. We'll just click on Capture. We could set a shortcut key for that if we wanted. Now we go back to the browser, and you can see how it has gone to the correct folder that we had set up in the Body tab. And there's our image. Go to Metadata. Shows my exposure. Some basic information. I could double click here. I can move the focus around. You can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, or right click to control the magnification levels. Okay, good. Now here on the thumb strip, I've configured it to show me the exposure information and the histogram and the thumbnail. But you can actually right click here and configure it and control which information is displayed there. All right, so now to make this review automatically, I'm going to go up to Tools menu and Preferences, Live View. And here's this area where we turn the GPU mode Live View on or off. And by default, when you install ControlMyCanon, it is off, so we don't have to change anything here. If you wanted to turn on GPU mode Live View, you put a check mark here, and then you'd have to restart the ControlMyCanon. We're going to go to the Browser tab, and we're going to tell it to automatically review. Take a shot. Displays. And comes back. All right. So next thing to take a look at is all these buttons up here. So we have the Close button, and this actually just closes Live View. Clicking on Live View opens it. This is the Autofocus button. So if you click on this, wherever this focus box is, it'll attempt to find something in focus in there. And for it to achieve a decent focus, you need to have a good amount of lighting and contrast. So because it uses contrast autofocus instead of phase autofocus, which is what is used in non-live view mode. So I can move this box around by left clicking on the screen. You see how it turns red, which means now it's not in focus. It doesn't. What is underneath this focus box is not in focus as far as the camera is concerned. It can't know if it's in focus or not yet because we have an attempt to autofocus on it. So let's try autofocusing on this spot. So you could click on this, or you can double click, or you could assign a key in the keyboard shortcuts. So I'll double click. See how it turns orange, which means the focus is in progress. And if it's successful, it will turn green. In this case, it did not. According to the body, it didn't find anything decently in focus. I can zoom in here, take a look. It looks like it's in focus to me. And that's kind of the problem with contrast autofocus. It can be very flaky. So I'm going to try it here instead. Well, like that, that's in focus. How about over here? And it'll hunt for focus for up to 5 seconds. And here it didn't like it. I'm just going to adjust it a little bit. There, it liked it. So you have to be kind of patient with it. We have a way to tweak the focus a little bit to ensure that it is correctly in focus. But, contrast autofocus is weird. If I was to go up here where there's no contrast and autofocus, as you might expect, it can't find anything to focus on. So it just hunts, and 5 seconds later, it's done, and it turns red. So, and there's nothing you can do about that. If there's no contrast, there's no contrast to autofocus. So I'm just going to double click back on the leading part of this image. There we go. You can see when I double clicked how the image brightened, and that's the body automatically adjusting the ISO to try and get as much light as possible to help establish contrast. All right, so let's see what else we have. So we have these buttons up here, and this moves your focus forward and back. And if you have a compatible CPU or body focus motor for your camera, it should work. Some third-party lenses won't work. Of course, if you have a bellows or no lens attached at all, this is not going to work because there's no focus mechanism. So, but see what happens here when I just click on this button here. I'm going to bring it nearer, and you can see that the focus is coming closer. I'll go further away. And I'll try a little further. And back. And you just have to take this very slowly. Some lenses can focus faster than others. This is a Canon 100mm macro lens. And it's not the fastest focuser. So sometimes you click and it won't focus, it won't move it because it's busy doing something else. Now the amount that the focus moves depends on the focus step. So you just click here to open this group up, and the fine focus steps 50 units. So that's not millimeters or anything like that. That's just an arbitrary unit that's used by Canon. And so these two buttons here in the middle with a single greater and less than sign use the fine. These other two buttons with the two greater than or less than signs use the coarse. Okay, let's see what else we have. Now, when you're focused in an area here, you could zoom in on it. And you can zoom up to 3 levels, but it depends on the body. The 60D here can only zoom up to 2 levels, so it only works up to number 2. Number 3 doesn't do anything. So 2, go back to 1. Oh, captured an image. That's okay. Fine piece of iron pyrite. Let's go back here, see if I can hit the button this time. There we go. 1, so magnify, no magnify. And once you're zoomed in like this, you can actually set up keyboard shortcuts that allow you to pan around the screen. So if you wanted to just nudge it a little to the right, you could set some keys to do that. Okay, I'm going to zoom back out and turn on the histogram. So the histogram here just allows you to see the overall exposure. Now, this really doesn't tell us where things are exposed. So for example, here, this large peak, it seems like there's a lot of exposure at this amount, but we don't know where this hump is in the image. We don't know where that little notch is in the image here, right? It's a little bump of white. So the histogram in live view is okay. It allows you to understand maybe the tonal range of the image you're about to capture. And this tonal range is somewhat limited. It's only about 2/3. It's not much happening over here. But it will allow you to see if anything's been blown out. So you see these red dots here that are flashing. That means at this particular frame that's being shown in the live view stream, it is saying that it is there's a problem on this end. So here, something keeps on sparkling and blowing out on us. I'm just going to turn off a light and see what happens. Now it's saying that nothing's really blowing out anymore, but something is definitely too dark. It's being underexposed. And that means that there's a value of 0 here in illuminance. If it was blown out, it would be a value of 255. Turn my light back on. Okay, so you can use that, but there's some other tools that will work a little bit better, and I'll show you those in a moment. All right, so now we also have this button here, and this just hides layers. So sometimes, you have so many layers on, you just want to see what the heck's behind it. You want to have to uncheck and disable each layer. You just toggle this on and off, and you can also assign a key to this in the shortcuts. This is a button for recording video, and we have a separate video on how to shoot video. And you can use this button for depth of field preview. This can be a little flaky depending on the body and lens combination. It usually works on the 60D and this lens. Basically what it means is when the live view is launched, that if your body's using exposure preview mode, and that's something that you can set on the body LCD display, it will try to show you what the exposure is going to be that you will actually capture. Okay, so giving you a preview of the exposure. And however, sometimes when you open live view, it's going to open it up all the way. It's going to completely open up the apertures to get as much light as possible. And using this button allows you to step it back down so your aperture would show exactly what you're going to shoot at. And the big difference here is that you'll be able to see a difference in the depth of field changing. Okay. So let's go over to the image here, and we have some options here. You could turn the image on and off. Now that is useful if you want to overlay some information. So for example, here is an outer exposure, and what you can do here is maybe change the background. So now you could see just the data of the image analysis layers. If you have a very complex image, it's sometimes difficult to see this. So I mean, I could turn some other ones on here as well. If I have the grid, I could put on focus peaking, which shows you things that are in focus or not. So that's really where that is useful. We'll come back to these in a moment. Well, for now, I'll turn it back on. Now you can also show it as grayscale, which is also useful for when you want to overlay information. Because you might have a bit of this color. If you have a very colorful image with a lot of different colors, it'll be difficult to find the proper color here to overlay with. Now, like I said, none of the settings you make here make a difference on the final captured image. It only changes what you're seeing here. Okay, I'll turn that off. Now we also have save on capture, and what that means is when we shoot an image here, and I'm just going to take one here. We're going to go shoot. Okay, there's what it's called. 00027.jpg. Okay. To go here and take a look at the folder that it was saved in. Go Explorer. .27.jpg. There it is. Okay, so this is a pretty large image. This is the image that was transferred from your camera. You could see 5184 by 3456. But here's another file that was added. 00027.lvbmp. It's a live view bitmap. Okay, so all you need to do is you can go and change the name so it's a bitmap, and there it is. And you see the size of it. I guess I won't show it here. The properties, details. This image is 1056 by 704. So this is the size of the JPEG that has been streamed during live view and displayed in ControlMyCanon. Now you can use this for several different things. You could use this to find out what the size of the live view image is. So then you could create your own and use it as an overlay. Or you can use this as an overlay on one of the other layers tabs that we have on the left-hand side. But generally speaking, if you don't need it, then what we will do is we'll just turn that back off. Okay. Copy stand mode allows you, it will automatically rotate and reverse the image if you are working on a copy stand. So if I go copy stand, back in the live view here, turn that off. copy stand, it does this. So if you're imagining, you know, you have your camera on a copy stand and it's pointing straight down at an object, perhaps like this, and you know, you go move the object on the copy stand and you move it straight up. It would be nice if it would actually move it straight up on the live view screen. And that's what this does. Because, you know, of course, if you don't do that, you move it up and it moves it down instead. You move it right and it moves it left. And that's a pain. So this just helps you keep oriented in what direction to move things when you're in copy stand mode. Okay, I'll turn that off. And we also have show as positive. Now what this does, it helps you preview what your image would look like if you were, say, scanning negative. So you take an image of an old negative from maybe 35 millimeter film, and this helps you understand what the exposure and the colors are going to be when you take this into post-processing later on. And we also have show as an angle here. Now some cameras are able to show this and some are not. Most of them not. We'll just leave it off for now. I generally don't find this very useful because, you know, the absolute pitch and roll is relative to the horizon, not the object you're shooting. So, yeah, I'm just going to turn this off. And we also have show background color. What that does is changes the color you see kind of in behind here. And here I'm going to show it, and you could change the color of the background. Now, if you click on this little button here, it returns it back to default. Okay, which is black. We could change the rotation, and normally this will be done by your camera. If you have it set to auto, then we'll show whatever the camera is showing. But you could override it and say make it level, or counterclockwise, clockwise, or invert. But that doesn't change the orientation of the final captured image. Generally speaking, we don't change anything about the image you capture. The only possible thing we change about it is we change a file name, and we may insert IPTC metadata. We won't touch your EXIF metadata, which is where the orientation is. So we try to keep your image as pristine and untouched as possible from the camera. And you can also crop it. So if you're planning on post-processing, maybe you're going to use this on maybe in a high-def video as something you wanted to display and you wanted to understand what that capture is going to look like. Once you're done cropping it to 16.9, this helps you preview it. And we also have 1.85, 2.39. I'll turn that off. And I'm just going to close this, and let's take a look at the focus box. Now the focus box allows you to, well, you can turn it on and off. Normally you want to keep it on. The focus box will disappear while you are manually changing the focus, and it'll change color when it's seeking the focus. So you can change the thickness of it and also the opacity. You can see it did not find anything suitably in focus in here. Tough to tell where it's looking. You know, I can see something in focus, but I have a feeling it's looking at the middle. It doesn't really say in the Canon SDK of where exactly in this box it's looking. This must be close enough, and it isn't exactly in the middle, so maybe it's down here. Who knows? Tough to say. So I'm going to reduce the thickness here so it's not too obtrusive. There we go. So I'll just leave that on. And we looked at focus step. Let's take a look at focus peaking. I'm going to go focus on this part first. Focus peaking is basically highlights areas that have very high contrast. Therefore, it should be in sharper, so it's in high focus. So if I turn this on, you can see it applies this overlay, and you can adjust the color. I'm going to leave it as this purple, and you can adjust the opacity, and you can adjust the threshold. This is how much contrast it needs before it'll highlight. So here you can make it very strict. Back here, not strict at all. So you could use this to help understand if the image is in focus. Sometimes you have an image that has so much detail in it and color, it's tough to tell when it's in focus. So you could do this. I'm just going to autofocus here. You can see how it changes. Okay, so if you need assistance like this to help seeing what is in focus, I strongly recommend using the GPU live view mode because it has a much more capable focus peaking function and some different modes to help you visualize focus. It's really nice. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off. Yeah, we also have the grid. And you can change the color of the grid. Set it back to default. The opacity of the grid, so you can make it very faint. Number of lines. But can't really control the thickness of the lines. So it's going to be a very fine grid. I'm just going to leave that on. The inner exposure marker. So we talked a bit about the markers, and what we want to do here instead of using a histogram is to turn on this marker and set the adjustment here to say I want to see everything that is between, say, an exposure of 21 and 230. So you might have a goal, especially if you're shooting human faces for a video, of saying we need to have that the face exposure between certain amounts. And this allows you to do that. So if I move the slider, we're going to show everything between, say, 72, and we'll make it a lot smaller, 136. This is the area that is within that range. So you can control the opacity. And you can also change the color. I normally just leave it as green, meaning green is good. It's in between. So if I bring this right back here to say, well, let's say 5 and 250. 250, there we go. So that's most of the area, except you can see some areas here are kind of sparkling a little bit. Those are areas of the image that do not fall in that range, and they could be blown out, but we'll use the next filter to find out. And you can see there was another area here where it's very bright. This area here was very dark. And I'm just going to turn this off. Very dark, very bright. Okay. Now, if you look at the exposure outer, this is one I find most useful. And if there's anything in ControlMyCanon that saves me the most time, it is this right here, because it's tough to tell when things are, blown out. If it's too dark or it's too bright, you could use a histogram, but where is it blown out? I could maybe want this to be high key and have the background pure blown out white. Histogram does not help me. However, the exposure outer marker does, because I could tell exactly where in the image there's an exposure problem. So here I have set it to, well, let's say show me anything less than 5 and greater than 250. Now, this one was show between 5 and 250. So if I go here and show this, now this is not over or underexposed. I mean, we don't know that yet. It's just very dark and very bright. If I turn this one on, the entire image should be analyzed here, showing the areas that are good in green and kind of dicey in red. So I'll turn this back off. Now let's tighten it up even further. Bring it down to 1, 254. Now, is anything blown out? It's difficult to see here, isn't it? I see some sparkling, but at a glance it's tough to see. So what you could do here is you could just turn the image on and off. You could even turn my focus box off to get out of the way. So these areas are a problem. They're not truly blown out yet, but if I bring it to 0 and 255, now there's nothing. So what happens if I turn off a light here? So I've turned off a light, and now I can see that these areas that are sparkling are too dark. When you go to maybe brighten these areas in post-processing, you won't be able to because there's no data behind it. There's no data less than it. So this will be a problem. So of course your goal is to, when you're shooting, is to set a very low number and a very high number. So this gives you a margin of 3 on either side. I'll turn my light back on. And this should not be blown out or too dark. So what you could do at this time is you could go here and I want to keep my ISO low, but you could go like this, and that's going to make it a little bit darker, but you're going to reduce the things that are blown out too bright, but you're going to increase the things that are too dark. So at this point, because this is a very shiny object, you'd have to just adjust your lighting. How much else you could do about it? Okay, I'm going to put my image back here. And you can also just do it as grayscale, which helps. Okay, so these two are very useful. If you're doing live view, you should be using these two. And the best way to do it is really set it up as a reasonable numbers here, save it to a profile. So here, when I disconnect, it's going to save, but I can go Control S here and save my profile, or right click and save. And so next time, if I come back to the iron pyrite profile, these will be already set up for me. Okay, moving on to labels. Now, labels is basically this this thing that shows up here when you shoot. And watch what happens if I shoot. See, it says that capturing there. Okay, so that's a label. But you could control the color of that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this. And maybe we wanted this white, a very, very transparent background. So now when we shoot, you just wait for a moment, this message will disappear. If I shoot, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, I'm just going to reset that back. Let's say to white and a bit of a darker background. Next, let's take a look at ISO pinning. Right, so ISO pinning allows you to deal with scenes that are very dark in live view. So I just think if you were, you were shooting with strobes, and your regular model lights or your ambient lighting isn't very bright. So when you look at your object, things are very dark. And I'm just going to simulate that by turning off some lights. Right, so this could be what it's like when you are shooting with strobes. Can't see a darn thing, or what you see is very faint, and that's no good at all. So you can use ISO pinning, and this is also called the brightness control in the GPU live view mode, and it's actually a little bit easier and better to use. But we'll use this old mode here. What it allows us to do is say, I want to view live view at a particular ISO level, a high ISO level, so we can see what we're doing. But when we shoot, we want it to go back to using the ISO, the ISO level that we had specified before. So if I go back here on our body and I could see that the ISO is 100, okay, that's what we want to shoot at because my strobes are going to fire and it'll be plenty bright. If I go to layers, I can't see anything. So I enable ISO pinning. And now I'm just going to drag this to the right and it's going to increase the ISO. And what I'm going to do here, and it just takes a moment for it to come up. I'll go all the way like this. And this is very dark here right now, but it did help. So now you can see it, and you'll notice if you go back here, it says ISO 6400, which is like as far as it can go on a 60D. So in behind the scenes, it cranked up the ISO, but that's okay because when I shoot, it's going to shoot it at ISO 100. And there it is. Look at my metadata. Go back. ISO 100. And it's a very dark image. Of course, if you had your strobes, it would have fired and it would have been beautiful. And you can see this red dot here. This means there's a problem on this side of your histogram. And of course, it is just completely underexposed. So now if we were to go back here, let's say you take some shots like this, go back into live view and say, okay, I am done with this. If you go back into live view here, into the body tab, you can see that your ISO is still up there. So what you need to do is either you can close this, and depending on the body, it might reset it. No, it didn't on this one, so you bring it back to 100. Now if I go back into live view, it's back to being very high again. I'm just going to reduce this to where it was. Enable, disable, ISO, A is automatic. Let's see, close it, back in live view. Okay, so now it's off. So the ISO pinning will help you when it is very dark and you're using strobes. If you can, use the GPU live view mode. It's just a little bit easier than this ISO pinning to control that brightness. All right, so let's close that and take a look at the overlay. First of all, I'm just going to turn on the lighting again. Okay, so now looking at our image here, we have an option to be able to put an overlay on it. So you can make this a custom overlay, and it should be the same size as a live view image. So what you can do is you can go here and capture an image as save on capture. You just check that, capture an image. You'll find that LVBMP file that we looked at earlier. Take that in a Photoshop or GIMP or wherever, edit it, as long as you have an image of the same size. And you can use a JPEG or a PNG. Yeah, or I think also a BMP. But if you use a PNG, you can have areas of transparency. And you can select the image you want here. And there's an overlays folder where you install ControlMyCanon. And there's just some sample ones here. And we're just using the one called frame. And you can see I still have my grid lines. And you can rotate it. And you could change the opacity. So this can be useful if you are trying to do before and after shots. So maybe if you were taking a picture of something that is going to change over time. So maybe you have an old historic photo of a building and a photo from 50 years ago. You could take that, scan it or whatever, get it into Photoshop, edit that image so that it is the correct dimensions and size, and use it as an overlay here in ControlMyCanon. Then you could go out to the site and overlay this image, maybe turn down the opacity a little bit, and then line up your shot so the new shot precisely lines up with the old shot. And that's kind of an old trick, because then you can maybe on the web just kind of flip between the two final shots. You can see before and after, because they're taken from the same perspective and the same location. So just a way to do it. We also use this kind of feature here in our motion capture workflow, because it overlays an image and you can actually see your movie as it's being created in stop motion. Yeah, there it is, stop motion. There's one more thing to show you, and that is View menu, Live View Monitor. And this shows an additional window that you can take and put on your monitor or another monitor. And it shows what you see in live view, but without any of the overlays. So you can see there's no grid lines here, no focus box, nothing. So if I was to go here and maybe focus, you can see it changes on the live view monitor window and your regular live view window. So this is useful if you're in a shoot where you have an extra monitor and sometimes you have a client who wants to kind of look over your shoulder and see what you're seeing in live view, but you don't want them to see maybe all this other stuff that you have set up. So that's how that's useful. So there you go. That's how you use the non-live GPU mode in ControlMyCanon. Happy tethering.